Farm 109, Chapter 15, the gastrointestinal system. So this chapter is going to introduce us to the digestive system, or the gastrointestinal system. And the functions of the GI system include to ingest or intake raw materials, meaning food, and break them down or digest the raw materials into a usable element for the body, either physically first and then chemically, absorb the elements, and eliminate what is not usable. The functions are accomplished through an array of amazing main and accessory organs, with food traveling through what is essentially a tube until the waste products are eliminated. The learning objectives for this chapter are to locate and describe the functions of the organs in the digestive system, locate and describe the function of the accessory organs of the digestive system, describe the various enzymes and chemicals needed for digestion, and describe common disorders of the GI system. The digestive tract is often known as the alimentary canal or alimentary tract, or the GI tract or gastrointestinal tract. It's a muscular tube that contains organs of digestion. The tube begins at the mouth and ends at the anus. In between, there are 2 points. These 2 points are the pharynx, which is your throat, which we talked about in the previous chapter, the esophagus, which is the tube that goes from the pharynx to the stomach, the small intestines, and the large intestines. Accessory organs of digestion include teeth, salivary glands, liver, pancreas, and gallbladder. The function, again, starting in the mouth, is ingestion, and that's where the food comes in. What occurs there is mastication, which is a fancy word for chewing. It's a mechanical and grinding food with the teeth and tongue, the beginning process of the physical breakdown. Digestion is the chemical act of breaking down the food into small molecules that can then be absorbed. Secretions include acids, buffers, enzymes, and water, which aid in the breakdown of food. Absorption is a process that once the food has been broken down physically and chemically, it is able to absorb through the lining of the digestive tract. Excretion, or is also known as defecation, is the elimination of the waste products. So the digestive system begins at the mouth. This is the pharynx, the throat, and here is the trachea, which is involved in the respiratory system, but behind the trachea is where the esophagus is located. So the esophagus runs down and it connects to the stomach. The food starts processing in the stomach with acids and other chemicals to break down from the solid form into a bolus, which is known as chyme, that then passes through the area of the stomach into the small intestine. Now, the acid in the stomach helps break down food, but the challenge is the stomach has a special lining to protect it from that acid, but the small intestine does not. So as the food passes through, it has to be treated with a buffer solution, something to neutralize that acid. So in the pancreas, certain enzymes and chemicals are produced. One of those chemicals is bicarbonate, and bicarbonate helps neutralize, so it shoots into the intestine where the food is coming in to neutralize this acidic ball of mush, basically. And then there's other enzymes such as amylase and pancrease and enzymes to break down the food further so that it can be absorbed in the small intestine. What's not absorbed travels through the small intestine and comes to the large intestine, where water can be absorbed out, and it travels through, and then it excretes out through the anus. Now, the accessory organs include the teeth, which are located up here, the liver, the gallbladder, the pancreas, and over here we see the spleen. In the oral cavity, the mouth leads to the buccal or buccal cavity, which is the oral cavity. The mouth receives, tastes, mechanically breaks down, and begins the process of chemical digestion of food by adding saliva and other chemicals. So if you take a piece of bread and you put it in your mouth and you hold it there for a minute, it's going to start breaking down in the fluid that's in your mouth. So you do not necessarily need to know all of your teeth. This isn't a dental program, but you can see how the teeth, there's different ones. Your incisors help break things down. Your molars help grind them. You have your tongue. You have your uvula, that little V thing in the back of your neck, in the back of your throat. The food enters, it's masticated, and it goes down the pharynx. Now the salivary glands, there are different salivary glands. There's sublingual salivary glands that are found under the tongue. There's submandibular. Those are located along the sides of the inner surface of the lower jaw, which is known as the mandible, which is why they're called submandibular. There's two pair of salivary glands controlled by the autonomic nervous system. We have large parotid salivary glands. Those are the ones that swell when you get the mumps. So those are located in the back area of your jaw towards your throat. And saliva is 99.4% water, but it also contains antibodies, buffers, ions, waste products, and enzymes. The enzymes act as an organic catalyst to help speed up chemical reaction. One of the enzymes is salivary amylase, and that speeds up the chemical activity in the breaking down of carbohydrates. So that's the enzyme in your saliva that helps dissolve that bread that was sitting in your mouth. After eating, saliva also cleans the oral surfaces, reducing the amount of bacteria that can grow in the mouth. So here's an illustration of the location of the salivary glands. So the submandibular, these are the ones that are near when you get the mumps, they get swollen up. You've got your sublingual, you've got your parotid, those are going to be over by the corner of your ear. Teeth, healthy gums. Your gums are also known as your gingiva. They help hold the teeth in place. Epithelial cells form a tight seal around the tooth to help prevent bacteria from coming in contact with the tooth cementum, or the base of the tooth. The pharynx, as we learned in the previous chapter, there are three parts to the pharynx. There's the nasopharynx, which is primarily the part of the respiratory system, and it's blocked by that soft palate where that uvula comes down. It kind of protects that. We have the oropharynx and the larynopharynx, and these act as passageways for food, water, and air. And the epiglottis covers the trachea to prevent the food from entering the lungs and forcing food into the esophagus. So it's kind of like a switch controlling which passageway is accessible. The esophagus is approximately 10 inches long, and it connects to the stomach. It extends from the pharynx through the thoracic cavity behind the trachea, goes through the diaphragm, and connects to the stomach in what's known as the peritoneal cavity. Normally a collapsed tube until the bolus of food is swallowed. So it just kind of relaxes and doesn't take up a lot of space when you're not eating. There are rhythmic contractions called peristalsis that helps push food down the esophagus. The esophagus walls are lined with stratified squamous epithelium that secrete mucus to make walls slippery. Cells make the lining resistant to abrasion and temperature extremes and irritation. Generally, we know if we drink something way too hot, we can still feel that. There is a muscular ring at the top of the esophagus called the pharyngoesophageal sphincter. It relaxes to open up the esophagus so food can enter. At the lower end of the esophagus, at the entrance to the stomach, there's another sphincter, and that's known as the lower esophageal sphincter, or LES. It's also known as the cardiac sphincter because it's located near your heart. This opens into the stomach and it closes to prevent the acid juices from splashing back up out of the stomach into the esophagus. When that occurs, that's what we call heartburn. It's also known as reflux. The whole process of swallowing food takes about 9 seconds, and fluid usually only takes seconds to be able to reach the stomach. So here we have a bolus of food. So we've masticated and we're swallowing. That bolus of food goes down. The epiglottis will close, keeping the trachea closed, and allow the food into the esophagus. The esophagus will kind of, you really can't see it very much here because it's collapsed. It has peristalsis that helps move it down. The diaphragm is here, so there's an opening so the food passes through. That's where the lower esophageal sphincter is located, and into the stomach. The walls of the alimentary canal have 4 basic types of tissue that line the entire tube, or the canal, from the esophagus down. The innermost layer is a mucosa, which lines the lumen of the canal, so the surface area where the food is coming in contact. The layer is composed mostly of surface epithelium with some connective tissue and has a thin, smooth muscle layer surrounding it. Mucosa also possesses cells that secrete digestive enzymes to break down foods and goblet cells that secrete mucus for lubrication. The submucosa layer is the next layer, and it is composed of soft connective tissue. Within this layer, we find blood vessels, lymph nodes called Peyer's patches, similar to the tonsils, and nerve endings. The next layer is called the muscularis externa and is composed of 2 layers of smooth muscle. The outermost layer, the serosa, is composed of a single thin layer of flat, serous, fluid-producing cells supported by connective tissue. Fluid secreted is important to keep the outer surface of the intestine moist and allow friction-free movement of the intestine against the abdominopelvic cavity. The esophagus differs in that it only possesses a loose layer of connective tissue. The next stop after the esophagus is the stomach. It is located on the left side of the abdominal cavity under the diaphragm, which is within the peritoneal cavity, and is pretty much covered up by the liver, which is on the right side of the body. Approximately 10 inches long, with a diameter dependent on how much has just been eaten. So it's kind of a muscular sac that can expand. It can hold up to 4 liters when it's full. So if you think about 2 big bottles of soda, that's a lot. The rugae, or folds within the stomach lining, help the stomach expand and contract. The stomach has 4 functions. It's a temporary holding area for receiving food. It secretes gastric acids and enzymes that mix with food, performing chemical digestion. It regulates the rate at which partially digested food, which is a thick, heavy, cream-like liquid known as chyme, enters the intestine, and absorbs small amounts of water and substances that are very limited bases. One of the substances that the stomach can absorb is alcohol. So here we have a picture of the stomach. So the esophagus comes down, and we have that lower esophageal sphincter, or LES, also known as the cardiac sphincter. The stomach has different regions to it. The top upper portion of the stomach is known as the fundus. Then we have the body of the stomach, and then the end portion before it starts into the intestine is known as the pylorus. At the bottom of the stomach near the pylorus, we have a pyloric sphincter. That keeps the food in the stomach while it's digesting, and then will open up and allow that chyme to pass into the small intestine. And the first area of the small intestine is known as the duodenum. Some also pronounce it duodenum. Duodenum is correct. I say duodenum when I'm trying to remember how to spell it. Within the stomach lining, it's got a lot of surface area. It's kind of like a wrinkled up bag. And the wrinkles are known as the rugae. So these rugae, or these surface areas, have mucus cells and parietal cells that release hydrochloric acid and intrinsic factor and the mucous membrane. But you see there's lots of surface area here, and then this can stretch out to hold more food, contract, but we've got lots of cells that can let those chemicals in to help aid in the breakdown of that food. Now, the stomach takes about 4 hours for it to empty after a meal. Liquids will pass through more quickly. Carbohydrates move through rather quickly. That's more of your simple carbohydrates, especially. Proteins may take a little bit more time to pass, and then fats take the longest, usually about 4 to 6 hours. Now, this is part of the reason that fat is important to our diet, because fat helps make us feel fuller longer, but it's got to be the right kind of fat. Now, as I was saying, the stomach is divided into different regions. Up near the heart is the cardiac region, which is surrounding the lower esophageal sphincter. Then the fundus. It's laterally and slightly superior to the cardiac region. It temporarily holds food as it enters the stomach. The body is the mid portion, and the funnel-shaped terminal end is called the pylorus. Most of the work of the stomach is performed in the pylorus region. This is where food passes through the pyloric sphincter into the small intestine. The muscular action works like a cement mixer, achieving it by 3 layers of muscles. We have a longitudinal layer, a circular layer, and an oblique layer. So they're pushing and pulling in different ways. It churns the food as it mixes it with the gastric juices, excreted by the gastric glands and the gastric pits of the columnar epithelial lining of the stomach. These secretions include gastric juice, which is comprised of hydrochloric acid, or HCl, pepsinogen, and mucus. Pepsinogen is secreted by the chief cells, while hydrochloric acid is secreted by the parietal cells. They combine to produce pepsin, which is the chief digestive enzyme. Pepsin will break down protein, and hydrochloric acid will break down the connective tissue. Hydrochloric acid has a pH of 1.5 to 2 and is effective at killing most pathogens. It's a very, very strong acid. Mucus cells can generate thick layer of mucus which shield the stomach from the effect of the stomach acids. Prostaglandins are the building block for mucosin, or that mucus layer that protects the stomach. The stomach also secretes intrinsic factor, which allows vitamin B12, which is known as cyanocobalamin, to be absorbed. So, a table from your text gives the type of cell in the stomach, the type of chemical that's secreted from that cell, and what its function is. Activity controlled in the stomach by parasympathetic nervous system, particularly the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve stimulation increases motility and secretory rates of the gastric glands. Now, if you remember back, I know it's been a long time, to the nervous system, we talked about the parasympathetic being the rest and digest side of the nervous system. So it controls that digestive component. The rate of movement of the chyme is very important. If it's too slow, the rate of nutrient digestion and absorption is decreased and may allow acidity of the chyme to cause erosion of the stomach lining. If it's too quickly, food particles may not be sufficiently mixed with the gastric juices, leading to insufficient digestion. chyme not given enough time to neutralize can cause erosion of the intestinal lining.